The slow rev of my car turned into an unhealthy, guttural whine. The old beast came to a pathetic halt, making my heart sink like a rock. "Christ," I angrily yelled, slamming my fist on the wheel. "It's okay," Abigail calmed me. She was my ever-assured and level-headed wife who sat beside me. Even now, with her hair in an untidy bun, her face free of makeup, and her eyes sunken from sleep deprivation, she was beautiful. "I'll check the engine," I told her, unbuckling my seatbelt. She went to do the same, but I put my hand on the buckle to stop her. "No, you rest up." She wasn't really dissatisfied, but Abigail never liked being the damsel in distress. As I leant over, she kissed my forehead. I smiled and slowly traced my hand up to her pregnant stomach. I could feel my son in there, breathing and squirming. I got out of the car and shut the door behind me. It was blisteringly cold. We were surrounded by woods and mountains, lit only by our barely functioning headlights. I could hear some kind of waterfall nearby, as it was the only sound. On the left-hand side, the woods were dense and about 10 meters away from the dirt road. On the right was the base of the mountain, rocky and allegedly prone to mild or severe landslides. Our car was a beaten-up, dusty old Toyota, and the fact that it wasn't sizzling was a good sign. The engine wasn't completely ruined and was certainly fixable. I took to the back of the car and I opened it up, revealing all of our stuff. Our suitcases full of clothes, my acoustic guitar, stuff for the baby, all buried atop my ever-helpful box of tools. I dug them out and lifted them up. They were older and more beaten up than the car, passed down from my grandpa, to my dad and then to me. Hey, but if it works, it works. As I walked back to the front, I noticed Abigail had opened her window. "You're not fixing it yourself, are you?" "Are you surprised?" "Come back inside, it's cold. I'll call someone." "Well, if it's cold, close the window and don't let it in. Do you even have service?" "Yeah, well, it comes on and off." "I'll get a head start on it." As I walk away, Abigail reaches a hand out to grab my arm. "You don't always have to be the hero, Arthur." She knew I didn't like hearing that, and in hindsight, I can see how right she is. I gently removed her grasp. "Don't go lunging like that." I eased her back in the car. "Hey, at least he'll like roller coasters when he's older, not like a sheep of a dad." I laughed, but then became very conscious of the noise that we were making. Abigail read me like a dang book. "What is it? Think something's gonna get us," she teased. I smiled a bit awkwardly. It was like I was talking to her for the first time again. Something could. There are bears in these mountains." I glanced over her shoulder, reminding myself of her shotgun on the back two seats. "If I yell, you get ready with that, alright?" Abigail smiled. "Whatever. I'm calling the maintenance company." "Alright, it's freezing. I gotta get this done." She rolled up the window and I got to work. Being a mechanic since I was 16 meant that I was well versed in the intricacies of the car, so I was confident that I could fix it whenever it broke down. Abigail wanted her son to be born in California, where she grew up, so we were driving to stay with her parents there for a few weeks as we await the birth. I'm self-employed, so I could just offer my services there to keep earning cash. My skills also gave me a chance to show off, as I unfortunately love to do. But today, the scene was different. The wind chilled me to my bones, making them quiver. My hands shook with a mix of the cold and uncertainty. This place was not a safe nor a comfortable one. My uncertainty led to my failure to fix the engine. The oil pan's bolts came loose and the thing was royally messed up. The clumsy nature that I took them off made me cut my hand with my tools. Nothing bad, but I was bleeding. "Abigail," I called. She rolled down the window and hurried out, dropping the hoodie that she was using as a blanket in the dirt. "What is it? Oh, crap." Knowing exactly what to do, before I could protest, she removed my coat and wrapped it around my hand tightly. As it begins to soak with blood, the wound throbs with pain, and she knots it even tighter. That coat was expensive," I joked. I saw her smile, which made my chills go away. "Shut up," she replied, slinging the rest of the coat over my shoulder. I held it steady. "I'll get the actual bandages. Does it hurt?" Yeah. "Baby." "You what?" We both laughed. As she takes my hand to lead me into the car, I get a sinking feeling. I stop, tugging her backwards by accident. "Arthur." There's shuffling coming from the woods. The rhythm of a chant begins to overpower the waterfall. My eyes zip about the tree line, trying to make sense of it all to find the source. "Arthur, what's that?" "Get the gun," I murmur. Abigail clutches onto my hand a bit tighter. Taking my eyes away from the trees, I look at her eyes. They're scared. An emotion I rarely see from her. The chants and whispers become louder, more aggressive. My eyes dart back to the woods. Red little beady lights litter the trees, like horrifying Christmas lights. They move up and down, left to right, and they all center on Abigail. The chanting is like talking now. "Get the gun," I command again. Abigail is frozen in fear. I dart in front of her, pushing her back to the car. "Get the gun, Abigail," I say more desperately. The eyes pick up on my fear, and they appear to move closer. In the darkness, I can now see their skinny silhouettes. They twitch and some convulse unnaturally. They're naked, and I see no folds or unnatural shapes. Abigail is in the car, scrambling for the shotgun, and that's when they make their move. They were there, and then they were all over us. They moved like shadows, scrambling all around me and the car like insects. They scratched, bit, slashed, even licked and grappled. They were tangible. I punched a few, but I could not see much of them as they attempted to blind me. But the worst part were the noises they made. They growled, hissed in a horrible chesty way, like pack-a-day smokers. And they screamed. By God, did they scream. Loud, high-pitched, soul-crushing screams. They drowned out Abigail's incessant cries for help. I heard a few blasts from the shotgun and the window shattering. They clambered all over the car, breaking inside as the rest shoved me to the ground. I was bleeding pretty bad, and I could only open my eyes for short glimpses. I saw old men and women, their skin wrecked and hard. Canyons of cuts littered their bodies, like they took time to carve into themselves. They were filthy, and they stunk like crap. I don't remember when they stopped, or what happened after I was torn up on the ground. They just went. It was as if they were a vision or a mirage, but my clothes were bloodstained. They had scratched me up and it stung like crazy. As I forced myself to stand up, the wilderness was quiet again. Abigail was gone. They took nothing except her, even leaving the scratched shotgun behind. I would have cried had I not been so angry. My car was ruined. The windows were all broken and shattered. The doors were more or less torn off. The headlights were shattered. The chairs were ripped open. The trunk prized open. Our belongings had been smashed to pieces. But I didn't care. I barely acknowledged it in my mind. I put on my coat, checked up on my wounds, and then lifted the shotgun and marched into the woods. Like I said, it was as quiet as a graveyard. There were no crows, no critters scurrying after having been disturbed by the attack. The forest slept. The only noise was what I marched towards, the waterfall. I couldn't see anything. I was blind, so I had to listen. The worst sprang into my mind as I walked, with passion and determination. Why wasn't she screaming? I reached the waterfall, having to descend a steep dirt slope. Breaking through the tree line, I found myself at a riverbed. It was lit up by torches. These creatures could understand fire. I followed the torches as they created a clear path. My body ached, unignorably so. I finally found the waterfall. The torches led right to it. It was high and splashed down into a rocky ledge before finally crashing into the river. Lost for a moment, I looked around for some kind of settlement or camp. I estimated their numbers to be at about 30, so they must have had some kind of home base. And that's when I clocked it. I slung the shotgun over my shoulder and heaved myself onto the ledge. The water fell painfully onto my cuts as I entered the waterfall. There was a cave behind it. The walls were scratched and cut, leaving crevices in the stone. The lighting was sparse and the ground was covered in dead grass. I clutched my weapon in my two hands, no matter how much it pained my newly opened wound. I plunged in. The chants echoed around me, but it sounded like they were coming from behind, above, even below me. The crevices became more common as the tunnel got deeper and more narrow. This place didn't feel natural, not even real. The tunnel became so narrow that I had to sidestep, pushing myself up against the stone. As it became more and more claustrophobic, the air became thin. Taking deep breaths, I held them for as long as possible and released them in natural successions. It calmed me down, fortunately. On one of the exhales, all of the excess air was pushed out as a hand sprung from the stone. They clawed at my eyes, my nose and ears. They weren't gray, and they weren't protruding from the walls. They were just there. I screamed as loud as I could, but the hands just held my mouth shut. They jabbed at my eyes, tried to pull my hair and ears from my body. I couldn't bring out my shotgun, so I just dropped it and tried to bat the hands away. Eventually, I crumbled to the floor, stuck between the small gap. The hands clawed at all of my body and ripped apart my clothing. They grappled at my body, becoming more and more violent, trying to rip it apart. Once again, I don't remember it ending, it just did. I was left quivering in the small rocky gap, my shotgun just out of reach. My bloody wounds were sticking to the rocks and would be painful to remove them, but I did, standing up and stumbling forward. I reached the end, where the tunnel finally began to open up again. A sprawling network of caves laid out before me, with a sunken crypt below it. It was like a beehive. I saw the shadows clambering around the edges of the tunnels like spiders, but none would come out. The area was lit up by more torches, and a single man stood in the center of the crypt. He was naked, skinny, and feral. The creature appeared to be human, but he wasn't. He was twitching, and his limbs were turning unnaturally. His right forearm was backwards, and his left hand was swiveling 360 degrees. He faced away from me. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed silent, looking down at him. As more of the creatures came to the mouths of their caves, they looked down at me. As others began whispering and chanting, the creature in the middle turned its head around and stared at me. When I say head, I mean just the head. Its body stayed exactly where it was. Its face was sunken in. Its beard was long and gray. He had no ears, but he did have a toothy, awful grin and pure, dark red eyes. "Arthur, Arthur, Arthur," he began chanting. It was Abigail's voice. Horrified, I stepped backwards and looked around the hive. More and more of the creatures came bounding to the edges of their caves. They ran on all fours and followed in the chants, one after another. "Arthur, Arthur." The noise became deafening, bouncing off of the walls. The chorus eventually began to overlap over itself, creating a horrifying aura. My head became heavy, and the room became unclear. As I snapped back to it, I raised my gun. They were out of range, but maybe something would ricochet and give one of them even a little bit of pain. But I couldn't shoot, as I realized something. They all had Abigail's face, but twisted. Her eyes were pure red, her skin was rough and scratched, her mouth had crevices carved into it. I couldn't move. I was stunned at the sight of it all. I was all too aware of the presence walking up behind me. "She is with us," a voice whispered. It was horrible, like the wind mixed with gravel and tobacco. I couldn't bear to turn around and face it. I left some time later. I can't tell you when. All I know is that 3 days had passed, but my wounds have only gotten worse. Search and rescue picked me up a few miles from the mountain as I stumbled down the dirt roads. It's been a few weeks, I know that at least. My whole perception of time is messed up. When I think that I was sitting for a minute, it's usually been hours. When I think that I've been awake for an hour, it becomes night. Like I said, these cuts keep getting worse. Pus trickles out of them. Sometimes it's red, and sometimes it's purple. One of them had slashed up my left eye, and now I can barely see out of it. My body feels heavier each day. I can't eat without it tasting of dirt and rock. I feel myself drifting. I don't want to wither away here, with my body slowly deteriorating. I bought a new gun and made myself a few Molotovs. I haven't worked for a while, but I still have enough money to rent a car. I'm going back to that mountain, to the cave behind the waterfall. I'm going to go out a hero, taking every single one of those things with me.